All right, this is the first lecture on U.S. history, and it's going to cover basically the um, start of U.S. history, and we'll kind of think about what happens at the forefront. It'll connect somewhat to some of the questions and the opening to Kaki's book, and kind of how this class will kind of follow the route of Takaki's, but also spend less time um, going down kind of a sequential linear model throughout U.S. history. From basically Christopher Columbus all the way to like the present day, because we are paying more attention to social cultural movements. Um, the lecture is going to be more theme based. So think of like the regular U.S. history courses. They're split between like again Columbus to about Reconstruction, so about 1492 to 1876, and then U.S. history part two is basically Reconstruction about 1876 all the way to the present day. So instead of just copying that and trying to squeeze two semesters worth of information in one class. The goal here is to kind of again look topical and thematically at different aspects of U.S. history, and so I think Takaki will get us there in a lot of ways. The book does a good job of doing themes and some sort of linearity, but at the same time um, also introducing us to kind of what you might consider the underside of American history, what oftentimes doesn't get as much attention, and looking at just the multicultural basis of American history from day one. And frankly, you could argue a multicultural basis of the Americas in general, from north to south. So and a lot of that just has to do with the fact of Columbus. So part of my introduction is just thinking about what the goal of Takaki's book is. I might have mentioned it in passing, but this is a book that was actually shared with me when I was just begun teaching as an adjunct. I just started grad school. I was teaching my old school, and I was teaching a historiography class, and I had a student. I had basically I had students pick a historian they wanted to cover and look at the historian's methodology. And in this class, I had a student who went to community college and said, I read Ronald Takaki for class. I really enjoyed the book. Just opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I want to do my project paper on him. So, long story short, it happened. I was kind of blown away by the production, um, and I picked up the books and tried to find any kind of media I could find from him as well. So it really kind of changed my perspective on how to think about how to teach American history, and to try to do, I guess, a both and approach, which is something again I'm gonna try to strive for in the lecture, is give you the general U.S. national history. Look at what basically Washington politics is doing, but at the same time paying attention to all the different, diverse and various expressions of culture in America that's happening throughout these 200 plus years. And so, in some ways, it's trying to be faithful to Kaki's view of multiculturalism. And I know that's, for some reason, that can be a very volatile term in some ways, even for both the political right, political left. There's for some reason, especially recently, that term has come under um, some criticism until I can find or someone can give me a better term to kind of just talk about the fact that, frankly, most societies have this multicultural base. People have been mixing and moving and traveling not just since Columbus, but all throughout history. And so, until someone can give me a better term to try to understand and try to be faithful somewhat to that aspect, um, I'm really going to kind of keep using this. I do like the fact that Takaki does focus on this Caliban character. It's a really fascinating character because um, Caliban comes from the Shakespeare play The Tempest. As you know, you're reading early on, you see, Takaki talk about this. But I think what the takeaway about Caliban is to really see in action um, the Renaissance European, cultural creator like Shakespeare or any European intellectual at this time period. Is this is the Renaissance period, so they're really trying to rethink how to do things, how to read, how to do religion. Right, Reformation's about to is getting going. How do we? What is the new nation state? Because you are sort of coming out of the Middle Ages. So seeing this Caliban figure as you're seeing, the European come in contact with an other that they had no clue about. And so using this as a lens really helps to try to look at this big theme for the next 500 years of history where, Europeans, because of technology, are able to like go across the world, right? The whole Columbus thing is, discovering quote the new world, and at the same time, the Portuguese are already in Indian Ocean. So it opens up this new stage of encountering, which will then eventually become things like colonialism and unfortunately things like racism will start to be developed as time goes on. And so um, you see Shakespeare struggling with this and having these two characters, and Caliban, as you can see in the art and in most depictions, comes off as almost like this fake human, animalistic human. And, it's illustrative of the fact that this legacy, this encounter that we always talk about that starts with around 1492 is an encounter of an us versus them kind of mentality. And it's something that's going to be a struggle for the next, you can argue even up to today. Um, and I do think if you study Caribbean literature, which is really interesting stuff, some really good theories. I mean, it's actually some groundbreaking theories come out of the Caribbean, not to mention the cultural production. And, I will highlight some of the ways the Caribbean connects even to the United States. Um, but there's a sub title given to Caribbean studies. It's actually called Caliban Studies. So a lot of the most famous Caribbean theorists, especially in the late 19th century, 20th century, go under this umbrella of Caliban studies. So they kind of recognize the otherness given to them by the Europeans. So if it is interesting. I do think it is, as I noted here, representative. Finally, I think Thomas Jefferson is really the really good test case. Guy wrote about everything, and he's very blunt about his opinions, and we'll deal with some of that. And I think somebody who can write so beautifully about democracy and liberty, and at the same time have such a complicated relationship when it comes to like slavery, views on expansion and other things. I think that his complicated legacy is a helpful lens to understand in general, like the United States complicated legacy. Let me see here. Yeah. Okay. So, one of the things I want to really like take up, especially as you're doing your post, is this kind of complicated legacy of U.S. history. Um, Different theorists will talk about like, well, why when we think about American history, yeah, we mention Columbus, and it is very much, uh, the founding story, and kids still learn about that. Um, but it's funny that story is complicated in of itself. Obviously, it's complicated because of what happens to Native Americans, and you're reading about some of that, and you can continue to see stuff about that in the course. Um, but at the same time, in some ways, the question I have is why do we tend to see Columbus and Spanish going to the Caribbean, making a few other stops over the years? Never goes to North America, by the way. Um, why do we see that as kind of the founding myth for United States history and culture, but it really isn't? In other words, like we kind of acknowledge, and you can see even this artwork here that's found in Washington about Columbus discovery, where some historians I read point out it's like Columbus is looking a lot more like George Washington in this kind of U.S. rendering of Columbus's discovery. Um, but you look at the way nation state history is spoken about. Uh, Columbus is like the first part of the story, and then we generally speaking just drop off the Spanish legacy, like it just goes away. And I would argue, and this is something I kind of want you all to think about your discussion as you're reading and you're going to post this week, is what is more of a founding U.S. myth? Is it Columbus or is it Plymouth? The Pilgrims coming to the U.S. and having basically Thanksgiving meal with the Wampanoags. So which one is really, if you think about it, you'd say if like you pulled 100 Americans, U.S. Americans aside and go, okay, what's the origin story of the United States? Would they start with Columbus, or would they gravitate more to Plymouth and the Pilgrims and the Native Americans? And why is that? Now, and even Francis Drake, the basically English pirate who's a thorn in the side of the Spanish, he was actually on the coast of California at one point. Why don't we ever talk about that, right? As like discovery. So, and then with the Spanish, as I mentioned, the history is not so great. If you think about the massive amount of loss of indigenous life over the years, the forced slavery, the disease, the conquest, um, that happened. It's all kind of exposed, especially in the work of Las Casas, Bartolome de las Casas, the priest. Um, However, even that's complicated, and they do kind of talk a bit. This kind of relates to Caliban representation. Um, the Valladolid debate is literally over the humanity of the indigenous. Are they human or are they not? And Lacoste is going to argue yes, they deserve human rights. It's one of the first examples of universal human rights being espoused. Um, the other figure, Sepulveda, basically is arguing more along an Aristotelian format that based off of the Greek philosopher Aristotle from way back in ancient Greece. But Aristotle believed there's a hierarchy in race, hierarchy in people, in social class, and said like there are naturally born slave people who are just slave-like and deserve to be mastered over. So he argues along those lines. And I think we're all, well, and the lecture is one of the ways that the Spanish deal with this is to say, okay, we won't, technically, we won't abuse the indigenous anymore, but we'll start really utilizing African slavery as a replacement. So we'll kind of leave the subject there, think about how an ugly turn that's going to be, And as a matter of fact, the oppression of indigenous life was still continuing.